And Brian is going to take us through the what, the how, and the why of the 12 steps of recovery.
Thank you, Melissa, for the introduction. Yeah, so I thought of this presentation in relation to, families asking about what we offer, what program do we follow, what do we offer your loved ones? And a lot of questions usually come up when you explain to loved ones that your loved one is currently working through a step 1 or a step 2, or they're doing this and that stuff. So today we're going to see what are these things that they're going to do? How will they help them? How will this program help your loved one? And why do we use this program of recovery? And that's the 12 steps of recovery. Okay, so more and more individuals are struggling with addiction every day, and I think a lot of us know that. The most important thing for those who are affected is, in order to effect real change, there needs to be a commitment to starting the recovery process. Of course, there's professional help that we offer, and this is required in order for the patient to take responsibility for their own lives and to start taking action. Addiction globally is estimated that 31 million people who use substance, an estimation of 31 million people use substance, have a substance use disorder problem. And in South Africa, this is twice the global average. This is according to the 2020 research published in the Journal of South African Family Practice. The drug problem in South Africa remains quite serious. According to Dr. David Baeva from South Africa's Central Drug Authority, at least 15% of all South Africans have a drug problem. And what we know is that is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a very large number of individuals who have experienced and successfully resolved dependence on alcohol or other drugs. These individuals refer to their new sober and productive lifestyle as recovery. And the 12 steps are the first key or the first tool that lead people that are in addiction into recovery. And recovery is defined in simple terms as a voluntarily maintained lifestyle composed of and characterized by sobriety, personal health, and citizenship. And this is according to Betty Ford Institute of Drug Addiction and Recovery. Next slide.
Might I just mention there,
yes, please,
that the Minnesota model, which the Betty Ford Institute brought into the addiction treatment setting, where they focus on the 12 steps and living recovery, is the only treatment model that has had a success rate for clients for more than 2 years. And that is why we're so adamant that long-term overall recovery comes from working the 12 steps and integrating into a program. So it really does work.
Yeah, it does. And I think from your experience, Melissa, you know a couple of people that are in recovery because of the 12-step program, and so do I. So we urge your loved ones to do this program because we have seen the results. They are results. And even when you start talking to your loved one, they'll give you feedback around their friends and their peers that they came into treatment with that are currently 1 year or 2 years or so. So it is a program that has worked, that has been tested. And that's why we tend to champion this. So most importantly, I think 12-step programs are not only they overcome addiction, they also serve as a guide to building a new way of life. These fellowships help loved ones connect with a community of people facing the same or similar challenges. 12-step fellowships also provide an important post-treatment structure and help individuals maintain long-term recovery. So if a loved one leaves an inpatient facility and they come to you, there is need for a loved one to connect with the fellowship. And this is what we call post-treatment structure, where recovery is an ongoing process. And it's an ongoing process because your loved one is engaged in the 12-step fellowship. And that's more than just helping the client stopping the use. That's more in how do we go on from here. Next slide. Okay, so these two gentlemen, the gentleman that you see on your left, this is Bill W. and Bob D. These are the two gentlemen that championed what we have today as the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book. The Big Book, all the 12-step programs, and we'll look at that in details, come from this book. But I thought maybe it's important for us see the founders. These two people were the founders of this big movement that has helped numerous and numerous of people. One is Bill W., who was an alcoholic, who, in order to stay sober, went out looking for someone to help, and that's how he found OD. By those two people meeting and having a discussion about what the problem was and how one was able to overcome it, that is how the 12-step program. The 12-step program is built on a pinnacle of one alcoholic or addict helping another, and that's where the fellowship comes in. And so the picture you see on the screen, that's the 4th edition of the big book, which is the basic text for Alcoholics Anonymous. Next slide. Okay, the concept of alcoholism as an illness, today it may seem like a bold idea, but before then it wasn't like that. When the book Alcoholics Anonymous was launched, and the book was about the story of how more than 100 people have recovered from alcoholism, many people believed that addiction was a choice. And I think some of us still think that there is a sense of self-will, there's a sense of decision-making that goes into addiction. But today researchers agree that there are aspects of addiction that reflect that it is a disease and that some people are more susceptible to it, especially if they have a family history of mental illness, addiction, or trauma. This publication did not only launch Alcoholics Anonymous as a globally recognized institution, but it also changed the way addiction was thought of. It introduced the 12-step model of recovery into the public arena, and therefore it led to Alcoholics Anonymous World Service being renowned. The success of AA launched numerous versions of other support groups, such as Narcotics Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, Sexaholics Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, all of which utilize the 12-step program. And that's how successful this book was, that people that were struggling with whatever form of addiction were able to replicate the same principles and create a fellowship around it. And those fellowships have also been successful, that today, if you're having a gambling problem and you join Gamblers Anonymous, you will be helped. If you have an eating problem, you can join Overeaters, and all these programs will help, and they all are based on the 12 steps. So when we look into the details, we'll see what each step gives to us as people in recovery. And this is, I think this is quite important. This is the first gentleman that categorized alcoholism as a disease. Before then, we knew that people had different opinions, but this gentleman, Dr. Silkworth, when he wrote the doctor's opinion in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, he explained that these people had a disease, and this disease manifested itself in form of an allergy. And that allergy was the craving. When you and someone else that you know that is a normal person, they take a drink, they don't want another drink. But for alcoholics, that craving, that need for something, for an addict, that need for something, that is a phenomenon of craving that is only limited to this type of people, this special entity. Yeah.
Brian, if I can just pop in there.
Yes.
Dr. Silkworth was talking about this in 1939. Now in 2023, we have the neuroscience imagery to prove it. And that is the real value of working the program. It has had a biopsychosocial spiritual approach, meaning from the body to the psychology, to connecting with people and having something outside of yourself, something more. All of this has been in place. Now we can prove it.
Yeah.
And we literally see in the addicted brain, it's the nucleus accumbens, it's the pleasure seeker. We see how that thing kicks into gear. We see how the hippocampus kicks into gear in a way that it doesn't in a functional civilian. Now we can prove.
And I think this gentleman was onto something. Of course, the people that were writing this book needed credibility coming from a doctor. At that time, he called it a phenomenon of craving, which is limited to this class of people. And like you have explained, Melissa, now we know that there's a lot of biology that goes into it.
Absolutely.
Yes, and I think, so the fact that this gentleman in 1939 was advocating for this as a disease shows that even though it might be back in the day he was onto something, today we know that it's a disease, that we should treat people suffering from this condition as people that have an illness that need to be helped through the illness instead of punished or excluded from society and all of that stuff. And we have come from far, and I think we still have a long way to go, but at least now they are facts that we can rely on and say, this is the problem and this is how to solve. Okay, so what are the 12 steps? So in the 12 steps, in the big book that I showed in a couple of slides before, there's a chapter is called How It Works. So as explained in chapter 5, how it works in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 steps provide a suggested program of recovery that has worked for other members of AA and continue to work through the years for many other members for whatever substance they have used. Each program follows a 12 standard steps. Below, we'll look at the 12 steps of AA, which all the programs have adopted, only making minor variations to address their specific purpose. So for example, an alcoholic will do the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, an EDA person will do, different groups, but it's all 12 standard steps. Though the original 12 steps of AA have been adapted over time, the premise of each step remains the same. For all recovery programs that use a 12-step model, by exploring the steps in depth and seeing how others have applied the principles in their lives, we can learn to use them and gain insight into our own experience and to gain strength and hope for recovery. And the steps and the principles are below. So there's the steps and there's the principles. So we'll look at each in depth and try to understand what is the value of doing this specific step. So the first step, which I think is one of the most important steps because it's the foundation. It determines the effort that your loved one puts into the rest of their program. And I know that a lot of families, their biggest challenge is convincing your loved one that they have a problem. So step one allows your loved one to admit that they have a problem with alcohol. And this is what this statement says. We admit that we're powerless over alcohol and that our lives have become unmanageable. In simple terms, I admit that me and drugs and alcohol can't get along and my life becomes a mess. And the principle around step one is honesty. After many years of denial, recovery can begin with one simple admission: the powerlessness of alcohol or any other drug that a person is addicted to. Their friends and families can also use the step to admit that their loved one has an addiction. Step one can be understood as a stage of acceptance. Addiction is the only disease that the sooner you accept, the freer you become. All the pain, all the unmanageability, all the chaos, all the insanity, all the fights are born out of your loved one refusing to admit that alcohol and drugs are making their lives a problem. And the moment they do, and that's what they focus on in primary, you have a problem. You didn't end up in treatment for good behavior. When you drink, these things happen. You ending up in treatment is a crisis situation. People that have problems with alcohol and drugs end up in this kind of crisis situations. We try to help a loved one come to acceptance that, hey, this thing that you have is not a curse, or it's not a moral failure, or it's just a disease. And the sooner you accept it, the quicker it will be for you to accept the solution going forward. Because we know that if you don't admit that there's a problem, then you won't work on it. You'll either focus on anything or everything else. And so this is where the acceptance comes in. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge. In order for your loved one to become addicted, and this is, Mel, this is what I always think about, that if people knew how much I drank and how much I used, they would have never allowed me to continue. So I had to hide, I had to pretend everything was okay. I had to hide my addiction because I knew that there were people around me that cared about me. And if they knew, they would be like, I think you need to go to treatment. So in me hiding That's where my denial became so real, because, I don't have a problem. What do you mean I have a problem, And so what step one allows clients is the ability to move forward.
Yes.
And you step out of the problem and you get into the solution, because you can spend years on step one, deliberating, is it to have a problem? But you find that if you do a step one, then everything else becomes much more easier. Someone that has accepted they have a problem, when you suggest things like, oh, I think according to your prognosis, you're going to need long-term recovery. They're like, yeah, I'll go to River Mana or go to secondary care. When you say, oh, you need to get a sponsor, they're like, yeah, I need to get a sponsor because I know how bad my problem is. Everything becomes, it's not really a small sale, but much more easier, because now they're more focused on the solution rather than the problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Step one also requires that you as the family members admit that you are powerless to fix this. Recovery is in the hands of the recovering individual. If we could do it for everybody else, we would. We really would, with all the love in the world. But you can't.
No.
This is where we detach with compassion, because all you have control over is your choice of response to the stimulus that you are given. Similarly, our addicts, they can choose to admit that they're powerless over certain things, and they can choose to admit and accept that when they work a program, they have things that are manageable and they are no longer powerless, because the thing over which they're powerless is no longer in the system.
Yeah.
That means we can.
Yeah, and I think usually Cheryl on this platform usually says you did cause it, you can't cure it, you can't control it, and I think that's a very good point, where yes, if he's addicted and he's powerless, I'm also powerless over him. And so the most valuable phases of this first step are powerless and unmanageability. The powerlessness attaches to the biology that we looked at previously, is that you have the phenomenon of craving, which is limited to you as an addicted person. And because you can't stop, you take one glass of alcohol, you want the second one, the third one, the fourth one. And because you're drinking like that, you're going to fail to pay your bills. You're going to disregard all your other social responsibilities. And that's what causes the unmanageability. Normal people, when they drink and they realize, oh, I have a job to go to tomorrow, they're able to stop. Therefore, they're not late for work the next day, because then there's no unmanageability. And I think that's what we work on for a long time. Recovery starts on step one. Really, this is the core. This is the core of recovery, understanding that I am addicted. I can deny it, I can deflect it, but I am addicted. And if I need to move forward, I need to come to acceptance with this.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's look at step two.
So I think we've covered this.
Yeah, step two. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. So step two is where now it gets a bit, when clients get to step two, yes, I understand I have a problem. Yes, my life got unmanageable, but now you're talking to me about these spiritual principles. This is where sometimes for some clients, the apprehension comes in. So I thought it would be important for families to understand that this is not a religious program, it's a spiritual program. And when we talk about higher power, these are things that we mean. Okay, so we believe that a power greater than ourselves can help us. This is step two. Before a higher power can begin to operate, you must believe that it can. Someone with an addiction accepts that there is a higher power to help them heal. Step two represents a stage of hope for potential recovery. Where the previous step may have sparked questions around being powerless with addiction, second step aims to show a way forward. Step two uses important terms such as higher power, and this is the first mention of a higher power within the steps. Later becomes God and Him, which may be used interchangeably with this concept. But maybe for clarity, a higher power is anything external that inspires you to stay sober. This power usually has a larger presence than an individual. This language is intended to make this belief accessible to all secular and spiritual people. So this was the founders trying to make sure that it's as inclusive as possible. Because if they had stuck to God, then we would find that there's no 12-step programs in Arabic countries, but we know that there's 12-step programs in Arabic countries or even in Asian countries. So they were trying to be as inclusive as possible. Next slide. Okay, examples of the higher power can include the religious God, the universe, or karma, and some people may choose a fellowship or the process of recovery itself. Other members have identified God as an acronym for good or direction. Some have even identified group of drugs for their fellowship. In the end, you decide what a higher power means to you. So we have a process in place. It's called the process of working, a step 2, where all these questions, where you get the opportunity to reframe your mind around spiritual concepts and what they really mean to you. You have come into treatment because you have a problem. And what we see, all the people that have been able to hit this problem have come to believe in a power greater than yourself. So let's try and make sense of what it means for you as an individual, in order for you to have hope that where you are is not the end. This is just the beginning of where the things happen. Usually, Mel, what I usually do with clients is I ask them if they were able to stay sober like for 30 days, and then usually they have never. And usually by the time they get to step 2, they are like 30 or 60 days clean. And I'm like, so did you make that happen? No, you didn't make it happen. Something other than you has helped. It could be the doctors, it could be the counselors, it could be the programs, it could be the 4 walls around you, but something other than you has helped you achieve something that you struggled to achieve for a long time. And if you start believing in something other than you, you're going to, this is just the beginning, because 60 days become 90 days, and they become 120, and they become a year. And that's where the hope stems from, that recovery is possible.
Also, when there is hope, we're forward leaning. So everybody has a neurologically wired way of approaching a problem, and it's either forward leaning or it's avoidant. If there's hope, and the language of the program is so incredible there, because from this step, everything leans us into moving toward a solution, not just avoiding a problem.
Avoiding, yes.
And leaning into hope connects me to visualizing a future. And the brain does not distinguish between thorough visualization and real experience. So when I see other people doing it and I can imagine myself there, that is the magic of the language of step 2. It gives me hope that can be me.
And also what we experience is with step 2, coming to believe in a power greater than you, we find that this is where a lot of clients stop fighting, because either they fight and then they surrender, because then in order to do a step 2, you have to put your ego aside at the illusion of control. But the acceptance that was built in step 1 allows for external guidance to assist individuals on their road to recovery.
100%.
Okay. Yes, let's look at step 3. Step 3 is where we decide to turn our wills and our lives over to the care of a higher power, whatever that may be. So you have identified the higher power in step 2, and this is where you come to turn your will. The best way I love to look at the will is what you think and what you're thinking. If you've been thinking this way, in order for you to be restored to sanity, that thinking has to change.
Yes.
If you thought that you can control everything, and you come into recovery and you're 60 days sober and you still think you can control everything, that is insane. You're still continuing the same thing. And this is where a lot of clients struggle, because they are faced with the notion of surrender. Surrender is a big part of step 3. Surrender is where you start trusting. You got the hope, now you have to start to trust, start to have faith that this thing will work for you. You can change your self-destructive decisions by recognizing that you alone cannot, but a higher power that you have chosen can help you through this process. Step 3 is identified as a stage of action. Notable phrases in this step include turning our will and God as we understand Him. Despite the spiritual language, note that 12 programs are open to all. They encourage anyone to use the program with their own concept of the higher power. Reframing the non-secular language is pivotal due to this flexible application. Next step. Let's look at step 4. Okay, so there's an image there that shows a key, and this person has a fearless key. They're going to unpack. Before we get into step 4, it's important to not recognize that addiction is just a symptom of underlying issues. And I think that's quite important for us to know. Yes, there's the abuse of the drug. Yes, there's the growth of, the tolerance grows and all of it. But there's always stimuli, there's always things that drive this individual to keep going back. Now, in order for all of us to unpack our lives, we need to do an inventory. What things about me have led me into this position where I can't stop? Okay. And what things about me are good that I need to keep? And this is where we get to step 4. And I'm sure a lot of you that have had your loved ones come to River Manor, which is a secondary care facility, you will hear this a lot. The whole objective is for people to start taking responsibility and look at step 4. And this is where you start to look at really your life and honesty. Yeah. So step 4 is when clients make a searching or inventory of themselves. Step 4 can also be viewed as a stage of honesty. The key terms to focus on here are fearless and a moral inventory of ourselves. By taking notes on the effect of one's addictive behaviors, they can identify what must change. This may be painful, but it helps them to process their impact. In order for change to happen, especially long-term change, I need to search within myself. What is it about me that is not helping? For example, if I'm arrogant and I'm egotistical, I'm not going to stay sober and stay egotistical and arrogant, but I won't know until I actually, because what has happened in life is that the families have been telling me that I'm arrogant and egotistical, right? I didn't hear any of that. Now I'm going to take responsibility by doing that myself with the help of a counselor or a sponsor and see, okay, this is what people are saying. And because I'm doing it myself, I think this is where we find a lot of loved ones willing to let go of this toxic behavior. This is where we start to see the change. This is where we start to see the growth. Clients come in and they're overburdened with past experiences, and this is where they start to let go of those. As this moral inventory grows, those in recovery find areas of both weakness and strength, which are both important when one is choosing actions that are morally correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, ultimately, the inventory process makes recovery much more attainable. You get rid of all the baggage of your past. Once you get rid of that, not entirely, but at least that beginning allows you to have a clean slate, have something to build on. It also sets the stage for a successful life over the long term.
Absolutely. This is where once you see a pattern of behavior and you put 2 and 2 together, that when I do this thing, these are the consequences and this is how it keeps happening. Now it makes sense to me to change it because everybody else has been shouting at me forever. But when I see it for myself on paper, and that's why it's so important to actually, it's not just about talking the steps, it's doing the step. When I put it down, pen to paper, it's like, I spot the pattern. When I recognize it, I own it, I can choose to do different. And this is where we really see the shift, because now I can change my pattern. And that means I can change my behavior and I can change my brain.
Yeah. And I think that's the best form of taking responsibilities when no one is telling you. I like how the step working guide that we use and all of that stuff has been that if you keep answering those questions honestly, you'll get to the bottom of what is really going without even anyone telling you. Usually a client will come to me and say, you know what, Brad, I recognize this. I used to remember my mom used to tell me this. Now I see because I've done this. I did this when I was in this place. I did this when I was in university. And that's so beautiful to experience. But unfortunately, we can't get to step 4 because the willingness to do the step 4 must have connected with step 1, understanding why that change needs to happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's the basic foundation of the first 4 steps. And then we'll look at a summary of the rest of the steps. But if you have any question around the topic for this evening, please feel free to, you know, throw the message in the chat box. We'll be able to answer it. But that was just the foundational steps that after you've done those major 4 steps, you're on your way into recovery. But this is the rest of the steps in summary without going into details so that we can also get the opportunity to get some questions and maybe some feedback. So step 5 is where we admit to our higher power, to ourselves, and to another human being, exactly to our wrongs. This is more like a confession, and I think confession is quite a spiritual thing that is practiced in a lot of religion. This is where we take ownership. In step 4, you look at the damage you caused, and what you did, and what kind of person you are. In step 5, you must talk to someone about that stuff. And this is where step 5 happens. We usually recommend that people that come to River Mana or Second Decay, they leave after they've done this step 5, because that's where they start to let go of this. Now, because we are rooted in ego and selfishness, because addiction is rooted in that, we get to step 6 where you can't fix yourself. You know, you have to be ready for a higher power to fix you. And this is where you accept yourself for who you really are, and you pray for the willingness to change the things that you can't. And step 6 principle is acceptance, accepting character defects exactly as they are, and becoming entirely willing to let them go. Admitting your faults and being like, okay, I'm that imperfect human being, but I'm willing to work through it. Okay, and step 7 is humbly ask. So this starts a prayer and meditation process as well. Yeah, like I said at the beginning, it's not a religious program, it's a spiritual program. And at step 7 is where we ask our higher power to remove our shortcomings. And the requirement here is humility. The spiritual focus for step 7 is humility, or asking higher power His will to be done instead of our own determination.
Because self-will leads us back to using and drinking or acting out on behaviors, because I mean, it's hardwired in the brain.
Yes.
If we do self-will, we do addiction.
Yes.
And it's not because we're bad people, that's how our brains are wired.
Yeah. Yes.
So we need guidance and help from an external source, because my reality, if I want to just do it my way, I'm going to use. But if I check in with my sponsor and my counselor and my fellowship, and I do the step work and I do it their way, because I have proof that it works.
Yes. And I think also what we realize is people start to beat themselves harshly with themselves, because they're like, I want these imperfections to go away. But no, these imperfections are probably part of who you are, because when you were drinking, you are an imperfect human being. Now that you've stopped, you're still an imperfect human being. And the sooner you come to terms with those imperfections and work on the ones that you can and the ones that you can, you work through them day by day. You don't have to whip yourself. You don't have to punish yourself for being human.
Absolutely.
Okay, and this step 8 and step 9 are usually combined. In step 8, you make a list of the people that you have harmed. I know families usually look forward. I'll have sometimes loved ones asking me, when is he going to make amends, or when is she going to make amends? Because this is, now it's time for him to actually take responsibility for the damage that he has caused. So yeah, they make a list of people they have harmed, and they become willing to make amends, and they will usually make amends. And this is usually in step 9. Step 9 says we made amends to these individuals. And this is a spiritual part of recovery where we start to get forgiveness more than give it. We start to get forgiveness. Making amends may seem challenging, but for those serious about recovery, it can be a great way to start healing relationships. This is where the relationships are healed, because your loved one will come to you and say, you know I did this to you, and I want you to know that I'm sorry, it won't happen again. And that's recovery. We need to always remember that recovery is restoration. We recover lost relationships, we recover lost time and lost abilities and all of that. So when they get to this part of their recovery, they're building the relationships again. and they will deal with it. I know that there's circumstances where loved ones don't accept amends, but they still have their recovery, because remember, they have a bunch of all these steps that have prepared them to this step. And usually at step 9, they're working hand on hand with the counselor or their sponsor, and they're usually in recovery a while now, about 4 or 6 or 8 months. So this is where recovery really gets really sticky. Okay, and step 10. So in order to maintain, these are called step 10, 11, and 12 are called the maintenance. Once we get rid of our past through the step 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, now we are ready to live this life of continued maintenance, where now that I'm sober, how do I maintain this sobriety? And I do that by taking a personal inventory and promptly admitting when I'm wrong. Nobody likes to admit being wrong, but it is necessary step in order to maintain spiritual progress in recovery.
This stops us from repeating patterns, because now we've spotted them.
Yes.
And I need to check in, because life is still going to happen. Stresses are still going to be there. And I can either react on my default and get really angry and egotistical and arrogant and blame everybody around me, or I can feel the impulse to do it and do the next right thing and behave differently. But I only have that if I can track my patterns. And I track what was good today, where was I honest, where was I dishonest, so that I get to do better.
And this is the step 10 maintenance. Okay. Absolutely. And the last 2 steps, that is step 11 and 12. Step 11 is prayer and meditation. You pray, you meditate, you do whatever you can do to maintain that relationship with whatever you chose in the early steps as your higher power, so that you keep in line. Interestingly, when people get into step 9 and step 10, life rewards them incredibly well. That sometimes things get so good, people forget where they came from. But these steps, step 11 and step 12, keeps you grounded and humble, despite all the blessings that you're getting. Let's keep you in touch with where you come from. And that's where also step 12 comes in, is where you become of service and you try to carry this message to other people. If your loved one is in recovery, please encourage them to go to meetings. Sometimes that's the only way that you maintain their recovery, because you only keep what you have by giving it away. And this is where step 12 comes in, and step 11 is spiritual growth.
What is also absolutely magic is by the time we're humble and willing, and we don't know best anymore. I'm willing to ask, what should I do? Instead of just bulldozing my way through a situation.
Yes, despite my 6 months of clean time.
Yes. And these two are also incredibly powerful for you guys, for the loved ones. So we really urge you also to connect with the sister fellowship, because you might be the person who shares that no one else has connected with anything, but they hear your story and they go, thank you, I'm not so alone anymore. And if you are willing to share your message in a group like this, in a sister fellowship, that is such connection power. And that starts spreading the hope from step 2. And that makes it possible. That's why this program still exists. That's why this still exists.
Because someone has carried the message to still others and instilled in them hope.
Absolutely.
So that's the 12 steps in a nutshell. The loved ones walk through that. And I think I did mention this, but I thought it would be quite important. 12-step programs are not religious programs. Even though we know that they're quite a mystery to those of the outside world of addiction of recovery. Some people believe that AA and NA are religious programs and don't want to participate in them because they're. In reality, these programs only ask for people to identify some kind of higher power and aren't necessarily spiritual or religious in nature. That's important, because I find that a lot of people keep away from the 12-step programs because of the religious connotations. And I thought I would put that out there. That if a loved one says, I don't want to go to those meetings because they're Bible bashing, that's not true. Okay. Let's look at the next step. So in a nutshell, I'm going to look at what is the purpose, what do they do, what are the results, first and foremost, and I think I did explain this as we're going along, is that someone doing the 12 steps will help them overcome the denial of their disease. It will help them develop a community of sober support people. They had a community of people that they drank or used with. Now they will create a community of people that are also sober with. Next slide. They will learn skills and knowledge from others in recovery. If you go to a meeting and there's a guy that, for example, he's a mechanic, you probably might learn from him that skill. Or if he's struggling with marriage issues and you listen to him, you'll find out that you can also learn from that. But also, like we looked at step 4, you understand and address the root causes of addiction. It also helps you to work and recognize the impact that addiction has had on you, your loved ones, your family, your community. It looks at every other person that has been impacted. So it also helps you develop faith and hope to begin the recovery process. Sometimes a lot of people refuse recovery because they don't know if it will work for them. But if you go to these meetings, you will hear people that talk about, usually what we do is we invite our old clients that have left the system to come and share with them so that they can have hope and faith in the process of recovery. It also empowers you to have confidence that you can overcome the addiction. I know for a lot of people that are in recovery tried numerous ways to stop. And the moment you started hearing that someone else is clean and they are clean because of this program, that confidence is what allowed you to keep coming back and to take on all the suggestions that it will work, because it definitely does work. And I think it helps in that. Also, the 12-step programs help repair broken relationships and right problems caused during active addiction. It also helps others in recovery by mentoring and supporting and guiding them. And this is where the sponsors come into play. So more than just the abstinence, there's all these values that come with it. So I think we have looked at this. I'm thinking of the time. Maybe let's go to the pros and cons, because everything has pros and cons, and I know a lot of families are like,
yes.
Yeah. Pros and cons of the 12 steps. So these are the pros, right? Why are we champions of the 12-step program? They're widely recognized and established. They connect people in recovery to an active support network. Active means if there is a meeting in Santon today, it will be there the next, and it will be there on the same time, the same day. So it's an active support network. The 12-step program instills positive values, morals, and principles that can help boost motivation. There are many groups and meetings all over the world. A big part of addiction is isolation. You come into recovery, it's plenty of people that you will connect with. So therefore, yeah, it costs free. It's accessible to all because it's free. If you go to an NA meeting, no one will ask you to pay anything. What treatment does introduces your loved ones to the 12-step programs, because usually of denial and all of that stuff, no one is going to wake up one day and say, I want to go to an NA or an AA meeting. Sometimes they need to be in treatment first in order to introduce the 12-step program. Yeah. They are proven, there's results to be effective in helping people overcome addictions. They can be combined with other treatment options. They have a very good relapse prevention program. You can do them, there's no graduation. You can do them over and over and over and over again. And the more you do them, the more sustainable your growth becomes. Meetings are available in most places in the world. I think they are actually in every place in the world. It might not be in the city that you are, but there'll be a meeting in a city close to where you are. There's always a meeting everywhere. Yeah, they are not led by licensed or trained professionals. So it's peer-to-peer support group structure.
And that's important,
yeah,
because every so often, I will tell a client something and they'll say, shut up, you haven't lived my life. What do you know?
Yeah.
But you go to a meeting and another addict with some clean time says exactly the same thing. They will listen because they identify.
And relate, yes.
And relate.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when there's that kind of buy-in, that's the magic. And I, as a clinician, I can wish it for every single one of them. But
As
they
long as it
don't
works
always
for you. Yeah, yeah. And I think it's the relating and identifying.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so
And
those are,
then
sorry, go ahead.
sorry, it's just the empathy in the program where I care for you because I know you care for me. So we're mutually invested in both of our recovery processes.
Sure.
That you don't get anywhere else. And that's pretty cool.
That's, yeah. And that's one of the cons, the pros. Now let's look at the cons.
Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not good for those who don't like group settings. Some people are apprehensive, you don't want to talk about your stuff around a group of strangers. So some people feel uncomfortable, early recovery anxieties, you drive to a meeting, you don't want to step in. So that can be a hindrance to some people. Also, it is not led by a licensed or trained professional. Some people are like, what do you know? You're just an addict like me. Also, it does not count as formal treatment for addiction. It doesn't help with the other aspects of addiction, such as withdrawals and detox and stuff like that. So it's just a peer support group structure. And this is where if you're going through it, you need actual medical help. Where you need to go and get detoxed. Then if you have mental health issues, you need to check yourself into a place that you will be supported fully, because it's just sometimes you won't get formal treatment for any of the other things that you may be struggling with. Some, but not all of them, some discourage the use of any substances, including prescribed medications. Some not groups are autonomous, and sometimes sponsors are also autonomous. So in some instances, for example, if you're on Mel, maybe you might help me here, where you're on like a heroin support program. What is it called?
Yes. So if you're on Suboxone,
yes,
where in order to support you physically so that you don't get ill from the withdrawal, there'll be a substitution.
Yes.
Some groups will say then you're not clean.
Yes, yes.
And that can be quite harmful because the person might really need the help.
Yes.
Also, if someone has a legitimate mental illness, as in they are bipolar, you can't step work your way out of a bipolar disorder. You need clinical support for that.
Yes, yes. And that's where sometimes the discouraging of medication comes into play. Yeah. So yeah, those are the cons, and we've looked at the pros. I think we'll open there's still some more. Apologies about that. Yeah, so does not address co-occurring, and I think you mentioned that as well. It's confidential, anonymous, so people don't know a lot about it. That's why I thought it was important for us to have this discussion on this platform. People in small communities may feel exposed when going to meetings. Someone knows you, you don't want to go to that same meeting because, they might say, oh, this guy's an addict. Some people require more intensive treatment for their addictions. Some people require long-term inpatient kind of stuff. So therefore you find that they can't be able to go home and they come to the meeting after 5 days. Some people don't like the sole focus on sobriety. Some people just want to learn how to manage their addiction or controlled using. And unfortunately in these talks, the programs, it's absolute abstinence. Meeting size, structure, and quality can vary depending on the group. Some groups are so big and some groups are so small. And this is what we mentioned earlier. People wanting to moderate or cut back may not find support within these communities, which are sobriety focused. So I guess that's it from us. Melanie, if you want to add anything.
I think I just want to drop the gentle hint there that the steps are magic for self-awareness and for creating the platform to change behavior. But it only really works once you are stable and contained and at a point where you are almost sane enough to make that decision. And that is why just working a program straight off the bat isn't always enough. And that is why a graduated treatment program like the one that Changes offers, where it's intensive inpatient, where that's triage, that's emergency. We're putting your body back together and just getting you to a point where you realize if you drink again, you're gonna die. Then we move to secondary, where we start to look at the behaviors and the patterns and the relationships, so that you can start reintegrating into life. And it's reintegration where the program is absolute magic, because it connects you with peers. It gives you structure. It keeps you connected to yourself and your process. But this alone might not be enough. So that is why we say work the program, and we started in primary, but be in primary care to get the full range of support that you need and the benefits. Then the chances of success go up to, correct me if I'm wrong, we're somewhere in the 80% statistically at the moment of if you have intensive inpatient and secondary and tertiary care and you work a 12-step program.
Incredible.
It's going to work.
Yeah.
Something's going to stick.
Yeah. And I think what's also heartbreaking sometimes is the people that just do primary and their statistics for relapses and and then you see how it improves secondary and how it improves tertiary and how it improves someone working an active program. Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree with you. So maybe let's open up the platform for any questions. I know it's been quite a lot. It is a lot for your loved ones as well. This is how overwhelming they feel when they get to experience a 12-step facility, because it's like step 1 and then you have to do it and it's all quite overwhelming, and then step 2 and then 12 steps. So I hope that we did break it down for you as families. I hope that you have a start. I hope that if your loved one says, I want to go to a meeting, you encourage them to go to a meeting.
Is it possible to get a copy of the slides?
Yes, that's possible. It can be arranged with the front desk. The front desk, yeah, it can be arranged, yes.
We will make that happen. Mickey, if you will get in touch with our lovely lady, Tanya, who would have been in touch with you around the meeting this evening, we will make that magic happen for you.
Okay. Any hands, questions?
Thanks for that, Evan. We appreciate, I'm glad it made sense for you. If you want more step goodness, try a sister fellowship or go to an open meeting. You don't necessarily have to go with your loved one. Oh, we don't give the slides. We will load this recording onto our website. We just got a message there from Kate. My apologies. So we will make the recording of the evening available on our website for you guys. Then the slides are in the presentation. Yeah, apologies for that one. As I was saying, the best way to get hands-on with the steps is to get in touch with the program. And they're Al-Anon, Nar-Anon, Co-Anon. They are absolutely magic. And then it also allows you to work the steps for your own process as the loved one, as the family, to go, I am powerless over my addicted loved one. And where do I maybe need some hope and some sanity back in my life, which touches on the self-care and the support that you need in this process. So that also comes into play.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, Mel, just to jump on that, I think it's important to understand that your loved ones are going through a program of recovery. Yes. And as unfortunate as this might sound, you need a program of recovery as well. The gentleman that I did show, Bill W., the wife who used to push him to go and get sober is the lady that founded the Al-Anon group globally, because she wanted to support families. Families are impacted by addiction as much as the loved one is. And it's important that when your loved one is getting well, you are also working through some form of group. Yeah.
And it means you get a chance to heal too. You get a chance to heal and restore and recover too.
Okay.
I think that is about time. So the recording of this evening will be made available on the website. If you want to look up a sister fellowship, Al-Anon, Nar-Anon, Co-Anon, Google them. You'll be taken directly to their incredibly user-friendly sites. I have to honestly commend World Services. They made effort to make it accessible. I'm not a computer person and I can deal with it. they will hook you up with meetings, local and international. And even though COVID wrecked us in a lot of senses, it made connecting with fellowship
Easier.
much easier.